Welcome to the Alt Asset Allocation Podcast, exploring alternative investment opportunities available to the everyday investor. Here's your host, Ben Lakoff.
Hello and welcome to the Alt Asset Allocation Podcast. Today's interview is with Xavier Ekkel, founder of PrePO. PrePO is a decentralized exchange allowing anyone, anywhere to speculate on the value of pre-IPO companies, so pre-publicly traded companies, or pre-token projects for all you ETH crypto degens out there. What's happening in the crypto market, specifically within this decentralized world, is very, very innovative, and things are moving at breakneck speed. This project is community-driven, and the markets listed on PrePO will be decided by the users of the project. This is pre-launch, by the way, but this means that private markets from all over the world can be listed on PrePO and accessed by anyone. These are synthetic versions of these companies. Important to note. Before you listen, please don't forget to like or subscribe to the podcast, or even better, leave a review. I love reviews. If you're watching this on YouTube, give it a little thumbs up and or subscribe to the channel or leave a comment. Those also are very great. Enjoy this conversation on all things synthetic assets and learn a little bit more about PrePO and what they're doing differently. Enjoy. Xavier, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. I'm pretty excited about this conversation. With this show, like, we talk about a lot of alternative investment opportunities, and the inability for investors to invest publicly traded is obviously something we've talked quite a bit about. Well, we've had people like WeFunder on, but it's part of this macro trend of moving towards retail investors having earlier and earlier access. So very excited to talk about this. But before we get into that, I think it's best probably to learn a little bit more about you and who you are.
Cool. Yeah, so I guess back in university, I studied economics and finance and computer science at the University of Melbourne. I didn't know it at the time, but I think that's like the perfect combo for starting a crypto startup. And around that same time as well, 2013, I was really drawn to the Wild West nature of Bitcoin and various altcoins. But it wasn't until 2018-ish when I heard about Ethereum that I came back into the space, this time more in terms of the programming side of things. I was also doing game development and game jams at the time. I was running my own experimental games startup. And when I was living in Korea, I found out about this blockchain game jam, which was hosted by Loom Network, who created Crypto Zombies, which was how I was learning Solidity. And so when I came back to Australia, I reached out to this Web3 studio called FlexSteps, and they're behind the MVPs for a number of projects like Mstable and Maple and Collabland and Blocknative. And so my first project was on the early smart contracts for Mstable. So I was also involved in DeFi very early on, before I even knew that it would be a big thing. But then I left to pursue more traditional software engineering to build up my skills. So I worked at this graphic design company called Canva, which is Australia's largest unicorn now. I learned a lot about the best practices in software engineering. And while I was there, I was really bullish on the long-term success of Canva. And so I wanted to get more exposure to their upside. But there wasn't any way to do this. And I also noticed all my friends and colleagues were facing this problem, that they wanted to get into all of these IPOs, but there was no way as a retail investor to get access. And basically, most of the upside was when it was private. And when they finally get access, it's already too late to make most of the gains. And so I wanted to solve this problem for me and my colleagues and my friends. And so that's how it all began, really. Then I started exploring how I could solve this problem for myself. And that's how I came up with PrePO.
Awesome. Yeah, and a big fan of Canva. It makes graphic design things so simple, even for Luddites like me, which is always appreciated. I think that's a good story. That makes a lot of sense. From Canva's perspective, like in this case, why do you think it's incentivizing for somebody, for the entity itself, to allow early exposure to the potential upside of their companies?
Yeah, so I guess it's important to note that PrePO is a synthetic asset platform. So we're not dealing directly with the real shares or the real equity or the real tokens of a particular project. By nature, that will be limited in how many people can access it, how many people get those opportunities. And so what we're doing is having a synthetic asset platform where we just have representations of it. And by doing that, we allow everyone to have unlimited access to the upside or downside of these opportunities. In that nature as well, it's permissionless. So we don't need the particular company or entity's permission per se to create a speculative market for those assets. But in terms of, there would be two users, like I guess one who works at the company or project, for example, and one who doesn't. If you work at the company or project, perhaps you could use PrePO as a bit of a hedging mechanism. Whereas if you're outside the project, it allows you to get exposure without actually having to work there.
Yeah, and I think the hedging aspect actually is super interesting. Presumably, if I were an early employee with a ton of equity, and then I see the company faltering from its longer term strategy and I get bearish on it, I could effectively short it through something like PrePO and take the other side of the trade, right? To hedge my large equity stake. I'm curious. I mean, the key question that comes up here, well, one of them is pricing. So, I mean, with somebody like Canva, and we can use another one, another example, but any of these larger tech post Series D, you have a bit of valuation from those rounds, but how are these pre-publicly traded market companies priced?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you think about other synthetic asset platforms, what they have is an oracle that feeds in a continuous price. That would be the latest public price that's available. And then you can peg it to that. Unfortunately, for private markets, there isn't a reliable price feed and it's not continuously updated. You might get the occasional, here's the latest round at this valuation kind of bit of information. But beyond that, you don't have this kind of information and you don't have this continuous price feed. So what we have to do is allow for open speculation. So it's just the forces of supply and demand that will determine any particular price. And we facilitate a market for that price discovery to occur. And then when it does go public, that's when we feed in one final settlement price, which is the price at the end of the first day of public trading for public companies. And for tokens, it's some time-weighted average to prevent manipulation.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe backing up a bit for my listeners, explain to me in general, like synthetic asset platforms, which ones exist, what they do well, what they can do better, like kind of paint the picture for me for synthetic asset platforms.
Yeah, so I guess with the idea with synthetic asset platforms is that it allows you to have upside or downside exposure without needing to own the actual asset. And since you're not tied to the actual asset, you're also not tied to a particular size of a position. So if you could only afford one share with a synthetic asset, you could scale that or leverage that up in either direction. You could also mint as many of them as you want in either direction. And so it allows everyone to get access. And by the nature of it being decentralized on the blockchain, it allows everyone around the world to participate in it permissionlessly. So in certain countries, you might not even have access to certain shares or equities from other countries. But through synthetic asset platforms, now you have access to what you previously didn't have before. So that's one of the key advantages, which is access for all.
In general, like these synthetic asset providers or creators, what are kind of the biggest regulatory concerns for people like that?
Yeah, so I would say it's a bit of a gray area right now, because I think from a regulatory perspective, I think they're still catching up to what Bitcoin is, let alone Ethereum and everything that's being built on Ethereum with decentralized finance, for example. And so I think it'll take some time before anything particularly clear comes out of that. I'm not a lawyer, but that's just what I've observed. And so I think that'll be cleared up over the coming years.
Okay. On this podcast, I've had people like WeFunder or other crowdfunding platforms. The idea there is that you can invest in these private companies before there's public markets. I guess for the average person, like how are you different than these current platforms? What are the pros and cons of a more decentralized version like PrePO?
Yeah, so with the decentralized version, there are a number of key advantages. So one is that you can maintain your privacy in terms of the documents you have to hand over to some centralized entity, there could be a data breach, and then suddenly all of your private information is out there. You have no limits on what you can participate in. We have no limits on what markets we can create as well, because it's all these token holders who are participating in governance to determine what new markets are created, what assets are listed, what the settlement prices are, what the parameters are. So because it's all decentralized, we don't face all these limits that you have when you try to shoehorn it into existing frameworks.
Okay, that makes sense. Talk to me about the creation of these synthetic markets. Who creates them? How are they maintained? Presumably, a key feature is liquidity so that you can buy and sell whenever you want. How is this incentivized and maintained? Just walk me through the process of what this looks like.
Yeah, so I guess there are two key actors, the traders and the liquidity providers that you talked about. So as a trader, we're trying to make it as simple as possible in terms of our UI. So we abstract away most of the crypto aspects of it. So essentially, as a trader, you're just going long or short with a particular size of a position, and then it will highlight what your maximum loss, maximum profit is. We have 3 layers of rewards there. So you have your profit or loss on your position, but then you also get token incentives, and you also get collateral, what we call collateral farming, which is when you deposit, that's turned into some form of collateral for the whole system. And in the background, that's earning yield farming rewards, regardless of how your position goes. And so it's quite heavily incentivized from a trader perspective. And then similarly, on the liquidity provider perspective, you would make your pool fees, so the cut of all the trading fees, but you also make those other 2 layers of rewards, which are the token incentives and the yield farming rewards, which we call collateral farming. And so as an LP, you're making many more layers of incentive, many more layers of rewards compared to if you just, for example, yield farmed stablecoins directly. So anyone who is yield farming stablecoins directly, it would probably make more sense to go through PrePO because you get those additional layers of rewards. Now, in terms of the extra risk there, looked at a lot of the other architectures that are similar. Architecturally, it's quite similar to a prediction market because you mint long and short tokens, which are fully collateralized by this collateral token that we make. But with a lot of the existing prediction markets out there, as an LP, it's really, really risky. You could lose 100% of what you put in. And that's because there are no limits on the upper or lower bounds, which means as soon as the outcome is known, one of the assets, the long or the short, will be sold completely, such that there's only the useless asset left in the pool. And that means the LPs will essentially lose everything. And so what we've done is we've tightened the trading bounds, and that minimizes the maximum loss that LPs can face. So with the parameters that we've kind of set up, the maximum loss LPs typically face is like less than 10%. And then with all those 3 layers of rewards on top of that, it really makes a lot of sense to be an LP because you don't face that huge disaster scenario of losing everything like on other platforms.
Yeah, that makes sense. A big portion of the rewards for taking this additional risk, adding liquidity to these markets is in your native governance token, which is it PPO?
Yeah. So, well, it's not the primary incentive mechanism. There are other synthetic asset platforms that rely a lot on incentivizing LPs through their native token. And that is an additional aspect for us, but we don't rely on that because in a bear market, that's not going to be a reliable incentive mechanism, especially if like token prices fall a lot. So we have to rely on a system that even if we didn't have those incentives, it would still make a lot of sense to do it. By having the minimized downside and by having the collateral farming aspect as well, that alone makes sense for LPs.
Okay. Talk to me about the benefits of holding PPO, the governance token itself. What does this get you as a token holder?
Yeah, so we're actually finalizing this right now. The PPO token gets you a number of utility benefits. So the PPO token itself can be used for various NFT purchases. That's because our whole platform is gamified. So you have your own social profiles, you have your avatars based on your actions on the trading platform. You can unlock achievements and various aspects where you can improve your social profile and avatar. And then those things can be traded freely. And so for PPO itself, you can use those for purchases, and those PPO tokens will be burned. But the primary purpose of PPO is staking it. And you would time lock those tokens in order to get a time locked version of PPO. And then with that time locked version of PPO, which is an NFT, so you have a certain amount of PPO locked up for a certain amount of time, which will unlock at a certain point in time. Those can then be further staked in order to get some share of the future PPO distributions or share of the trading fees and other benefits like trading fee discounts. And so we have one aspect there where you can time lock your PPO tokens for time locked PPO NFTs, or you can stake your PPO tokens into a group pool, which is kind of like us building our own in-house convex finance. So I guess the whole like tokenomics aspect of it is quite similar to curve finance, but with curve finance, you saw that convex finance was built on top, which allowed for more liquidity in these otherwise illiquid time-locked tokens. And so we wanted to build that into our system from the get-go so that we don't have some other protocol taking some large cut of fees and taking value out of the system. So we've built that into our protocol from the beginning. So you can either go through the group pool or you can go through the traditional time locking approach. You would go through the traditional time locking approach if you want to hold PPO and be an LP. But if you just want to hold PPO, then you would just go through the group pool.
Awesome. Another thing I have here, you're launching on mainnet. Maybe just touch on roadmap, what's coming up from PrePO.
Yeah, so very, very soon we'll be launching a simulator. This will allow you to visualize different scenarios as a trader or an LP. So you can see how much you can make or lose in different scenarios in different markets based on different parameters. And so it's a really sophisticated calculator that'll really get you understanding how PrePO works and all the different layers of rewards there. So that's coming really soon. Shortly after that, we'll also have an NFT game. And this is it's a bit of guerrilla marketing because we're trying to bring in a lot of the NFT gaming crowd because of our gamification aspects. But I think there are some really unique aspects to this game. So it's themed around mergers and acquisitions. And so you essentially have all these NFTs with the different traits and rarities, but you can compete with other companies based on runway points that you earn every day. And by competing them down to 0, then you can acquire those companies. You can also merge with companies that you own to make them more powerful, to earn more runway points every day. And so all these strategies will emerge and the number of remaining NFTs will decrease until there's only a small number of companies remaining. And then these could be added to your social profiles once we launch that. So that's the NFT game. And then after that, later this year, we're launching our testnet. So you'll be able to play around with that, but it's not the real thing yet. And also launching our governance token. And then early next year, after we get our audits, we'll be launching on mainnet.
Awesome. Super excited. What aspect? I mean, you've got a bunch of really exciting things coming up. What excites you the most?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see it get launched and see what kind of prices come out of each of these private markets that didn't previously have a price, particularly on the pre-token side. So you can speculate on these pre-IPO aspects, and that's what we originally thought of. But I think even a bigger opportunity is the pre-token side. So there are all these crypto projects without a token yet. And typically the crypto project side of things, they move a lot faster and have a lot more volatility in their valuation. So I think it'll be a lot more fun to speculate on that side of things. So for example, OpenSea, I think they'll probably have a token. It'd be interesting to see what kind of valuation that would have before they actually launch the token. And through PrePO, you'd be able to find that out.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting if they actually do a retroactive airdrop, because I think we'll all be millionaires with the amount of fees we've paid. That's exciting. Is there anybody doing anything similar to this already that you can speculate on pre-token companies?
No. Pre-token companies, I haven't seen it before. I have seen some where, you're dealing with the real like vesting tokens of the actual project. But of course, that has like limited number of participants because there's only so many, vesting tokens that you can offer as NFTs. And it depends completely on the seller whether if they even want to list those things. Whereas with PrePO, you can just speculate without permission.
Awesome. Xavier, super, super fascinating. I'm really, really excited to see this thing launch and speculate on some pre-token companies and if maybe some pre-IPO companies as well. Where do you want to send my listeners? Where can they find out more about you, about PrePO? Where do you want to send them?
Yeah, so I guess our key communities are on Discord and Twitter. So you can follow us on Twitter at PrePO_IO. And we have a growing Discord community. We even have a preachers program where if you do various actions to promote PrePO and spread the good word, you can be marked as a preacher and earn potentially future PPO tokens. And I'm personally on Twitter at Xavier Ekkel.
Awesome. Xavier, really appreciate you coming on today and best of luck with everything over the next little bit. That's for sure.
Thanks very much.
There you have it. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate your support. Show notes, transcript, links, and more can be found on our website at altassetallocation.com. If you'd be so kind, please share this with anyone you think might be interested or get some value from this conversation. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out. I'm always happy to hear them. Lastly, if you're on YouTube, please like the video or subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to the audio version of this, please subscribe to the podcast and or leave a review. This really helps more people find the podcast, and I really appreciate it. Thanks again, and hope you have a fantastic day. Happy investing.